For the next set of notes, you need something that's shaped like this, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up folding it into a pyramid. So I'm going to fold this, and I've put one of these on the module so that if you want to, you can trace it with a piece of paper, or you can print it out if you have a printer, or you know what, you can just take these notes and not make it into a fancy pyramid. That's also totally fine. It's not that big of a deal. All right, we are taking notes today on pyramids, specifically a pyramid of biomass. So I'm going to start by defining biomass, and I'm going to start that here, but this is going to be a pyramid, so I'm going to tilt it so that this point in the center here is at the top. So let's see here. Biomass is important. And we define it as the dry mass of all the organisms in a trophic level. So we would say, for example, our trophic level of producers, that has all of our plants. So if we could take all of our plants, dry them, so we're going to remove any water that's not actually in the cells and really like being held by, say, DNA actually holds a lot of water inside of it, and so if it's not actually held by that, if we could just dry it out and be left with just the biomolecules, we'd have removed all the water, then that's what we call our biomass. So another way to think of this is that it's the mass of all of the carbon-containing molecules. So I'm going to put a little quote here. So it's the mass of all the carbon containing molecules in the trophic level. So if we got rid of all the water, we're just going to have those biomolecules left, and that's what our biomass is. So biomass is the mass of the biomolecules. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about, we have defined biomass. So let's draw a pyramid of biomass for our prairie food chain. So you had that prairie food chain in the cycling of matter, flow of energy. So I'm going to put that here. So I'm going to start at the bottom because I'm going to need kind of a big space. But in our prairie ecosystem, we started with a bunch of grass. And there's a lot of biomass in those grasses. So there's a whole bunch of grass, and the grass contains a lot of biomolecules. Therefore, it has a lot of biomass. If I move up to the next level, I have what eats the grass, and that is a prairie dog. You know, I always forget how to spell prairie dog. I hope that's right. And then prairie dogs are eaten by ferrets. And ferrets are eaten by foxes. And you'll notice that in my pyramid, it's shaped like a pyramid because I have way more biomass in my grass. I have way more organisms, and those organisms have a lot more biomolecules. And then those prairie dogs, they eat some of that grass, and the ferrets eat some of the prairie dogs, and the foxes eat some of the ferrets. So I get less and less biomass as I move through this pyramid. And in fact, this is where our 10% rule comes into play. So the 10% rule says that 10% of the energy in one trophic level is moved to the next. So if I was actually drawing this to scale, I would need to have grass would be the whole thing here. And then prairie dogs would actually only be 10% of that. So if I could cut this into 10 equal pieces, the prairie dogs would equal just one of those. But I was not able to draw this to scale. So 10% of the energy, which means 10% of the biomass, because those biomolecules have that chemical energy stored in them, is able to move to the next level. And then from the prairie dogs to the ferrets, again, we're only going to get a 10% transfer. And from the ferrets to the foxes, again, we only have a 10% transfer in energy. Okay, let's look at the next thing. How are biomass and energy related? So we actually just talked about this, but let's go ahead and get it into writing. As biomass increases, energy increases. And the reason for this is because biomass equals molecules with high energy carbon to carbon or carbon to hydrogen bonds. And we know that those carbon to carbon and carbon to hydrogen bonds are chemical energy. So if I have more energy in my grasses, because I have more biomass in my grasses, and 10% of that biomass moves to my prairie dogs, that means 10% of the energy moves to the prairie dogs. 10% of the energy moves to the ferrets because 10% of the biomass moves to the ferrets. All right, last but not least, draw a food chain for the prairie ecosystem, label each trophic level, write the number of organisms at each trophic level. All right, so first I'm going to start with my grasses. Now, my grasses are my producers or autotrophs. We can use both words. They mean pretty much the same thing. Now, my grasses are eaten by prairie dogs. And prairie dogs are called first order heterotrophs. So first order heterotrophs. Heterotrophs. We also call these primary consumers. Now, prairie dogs are going to be eaten by ferrets, and ferrets are second order heterotrophs. or secondary consumers. And then last but not least, we have our foxes. And I'm not going to have enough space to write all of this out, but these would be called third order heterotrophs or tertiary consumers. And if we're looking at the number of organisms here at each of these levels, our grass we would measure in tons. And if we have about 4,000 tons of grass, that can support about 25,000 prairie dogs. But 25,000 prairie dogs can actually only support about 80 ferrets. And 80 ferrets can only support about 10 foxes. And the reason for this is that as you go up this food chain, you lose biomass, so you lose energy, and there's just not enough molecules for energy and building more foxes to have more than 10 foxes at the top of this food chain. So this now can fold into a pyramid. And this can be kind of fun to just have in your notebook, or you can just tape it into your notebook flat, or if you just wrote it in your notebook, then you've got it flat there. But that is our pyramid notes.